So welcome. I'm Jonathan Wise. I'm co-founder of Purpose Disruptors, and welcome to this masterclass, which allows us to go deeper into the work that was done into the paper that we produced that was launched at COP30 in Berlin, called Beyond the Chaos, Ahead of the Curve. And so today we're going to hear from Nadine Ayyashi, the strategy director at Purpose Disruptors. She's just going to kind of give us some of the headline findings from the paper. And then the meat of the session is going to be speaking with Lucy Usher, Jenny Mossman, and Paul Elliott, all people from our working group who contributed heavily and have a deeper understanding of what it takes to both start to integrate the service emission action areas into their work and measure their appetite emissions. Before we start then and hear from Nadine, as Purpose Disruptors, one of the things we like to do is just to kind of check in. So this idea that we just kind of understand how we're landing in the meetings that we have. And so our check-in question, and so please put your responses into the chat. Our check-in question is, how are you feeling at this moment being in the second half of the decisive decade? So obviously the decisive decade, the 2020s, when we're supposed to be dramatically reducing our carbon emissions. 2026, the second half of that. How are you feeling at the beginning of 2026? And I'll ask that panel to the panelists as well. So please feel free to share whether you're feeling hopeful or not, or whatever that might be, just to kind of get a sense of where you're coming into this meeting. Thank you. Ask me after COP. Exactly, James. Thank you. Yes, apprehensive and hopeful. Thank you, Nadine. Yes, anxious and trying to prepare for whatever's next. Yes, I'm hearing you there, Hazel. Yes. Okay, let's see if there's any other answers come through. But now I think I'll pass over to Nadine. And Nadine, please tell us what we're here to learn about.
Great. Thank you so much for joining and spending the afternoon with us. I promise not to talk too much and get to our lovely panel as soon as possible. But before we get started, we just wanted to share with you a little bit of framing or just kind of context to land us in the session based on our report that we wrote this year. So firstly, just a bit about Purpose Disruptors. Our vision is for a future in which advertising works in harmony with the natural world. To that end, we are trying to help the industry through many different pillars. But today's session, we're going to focus on Jonathan, Amon, and my pillar, which is measurement. Very exciting world. So it's all about impact and trying to understand how we can drive the advertising industry towards a more sustainable future through the geeky world of data, risk, and climate emissions. But moving swiftly on, we just wanted to land this moment based on the work that we are doing. So over the past few years, we've been finding that there were many forces that are affecting the ad industry, creating a surround sound of pressure. And you'll hear us talk about this a lot. And this varies over time. So in every report that we wrote, it's the same visual, but it's just changing elements. And in this moment, we find that there are three distinct great pressure points that are competing for leadership attention and for investment. And you're all, I'm sure, aware of it. They're not separate challenges. They're all colliding and creating short-term defensiveness within the industry. So from political upheaval and regulatory uncertainty, not going to go into that today, to AI-driven disruption, new tools that reshape the way we work and reshape organizations completely, to the accelerating climate crisis. This is no longer about moral obligation. It's about the real risk that's going to affect ourselves, our planet, and our clients. So in response to these pressures, we are finding that there are two approaches or two responses that are happening within not just our industry, but all other sectors as well. There are those who are retreating from taking action and doubling down on short term, but there are those who are quietly preparing for the transition, for what's to come, making sure that their long-term strategies are aligned with planetary boundaries. So the big question we always hold is, how do we help the industry transition in this time of uncertainty from a point where it's chaotic and disruptive to move towards a world where you're creating work that enables people to live in line with planetary boundaries and in harmony with the natural world. And in order to do that, we feel like the first big step is to understand the holistic impact of the industry. So moving away from just understanding what's happening within our house, so understanding our internal impact or our operational impact, to the wider holistic impact of the industry. This is a $1 trillion industry globally, which is quite large. And just thinking about the number of people it influences, we have the ability to shape cultures, to change social values, and to drive the direction of economic influence. So this is where service emissions comes, a framework that was created by two powerhouses, climate powerhouses, Race to Zero and Oxford Net Zero. And the purpose of it was to align the impact of the influence industries, the ones that are force multipliers in the economy. And this includes management consulting, law, ads, PR, and others. And by definition, service emissions are GHG emissions created by client activities that are informed by advice and or services of professional services firms. Basically, they are the emissions that are created as a result of the influence a professional service firm has on client activities. The framework consists of 6 different steps. They range from strategy all the way to measurement. They're really simple to understand, hard to implement sometimes, but they give you a very clear pathway and roadmap to a very well in the transition. But in order to understand service emissions properly, it's important the best way to do this is to think about it in terms of this lovely diagram. So service emissions enables you to take a whole company approach with the client portfolio at the heart of it. So the important questions to ask are, who do we work with? What type of work do we provide? And what services do we offer? Ultimately, where does our influence lie? So where does PD come in? This is where, so we've developed the advertised emissions methodology. We've been working on this for the past 4 years, and now it fits under the service emissions umbrella. And it's focused very much on the advertising and PR industries. It's a very simple calculation. And when we first started, our intention was to shed a light on the part of the industry that was a blind spot. So it was to try to better understand the climate impact of the additional consumption created by the advertising campaigns created by our industry. And we are currently working with the brightest minds from within and outside our industry to make sure that it becomes a robust methodology that can be applied to all different types of organizations, because we know that the advertising industry, no two organizations are the same. And our main intention for this is to become embedded into the global standards like GHGP, ISO, and SBTI. And the most important question to ask is, why does this matter? Why does this matter now? When we first started, we thought this was going to be about disclosures only, but we quickly realized that it is a lot bigger than that. Even though reporting is still critically important as a baseline and to provide you with the data-driven insights that you need, this is also about gaining a picture, the full picture of climate-related risks that will soon impact operational profit and supply chains, especially of clients. And it's also a tool to help you understand the levers of value creation. So what are the strategic decisions that you need to make in order to stay relevant and resilient? So before I hand over to our lovely panel, I'm just going to touch on two of those elements. So some good news over the next year and flowing in from last year, the big global standards are going through an update to their methodologies and their guidelines, with SBTI being the first one. And we are currently working on engaging with those clients in global standards to ensure that advertised emissions is embedded in there. So SBTI has expanded its definition of around fossil fuel extraction to include service providers such as marketing, law, and management consulting. And we're hoping that we will be able to do the same with GHGP and ISO in the near future when their consultations are underway. The next big thing is climate risk, which is the crux of our work. Our intention with advertised emissions is to help you highlight the pathway from current commercial activity to potential climate risks. Advertised emissions aren't a risk in themselves yet, but they simply reveal where our influence lies, like where the hotspots are in our client's portfolio and what is going to make existing risks even bigger. And one easy way to look at it, which is kind of a specific, unique exposure to advertising, is the demand depletion cycle. So advertising carries this unique exposure because it creates influences demand and accelerates the depletion of the resources that are needed in order to make products and services which are sold by clients. And therefore, it's a vicious cycle, which means that the more you accelerate demand, the less resources are available for future products and services. And that's why we need to consider planetary boundaries as business boundaries. And finally, before I move on to the panel, I just wanted to ask the audience if you could keep this in mind when listening to what our panel has to say. What is the first step that I can do tomorrow from where I stand? Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Nadine. So that's a sort of a summary of advertiser missions and service missions. And so now we're going to move to the panel. And our first panelist, I'm going to introduce is the wonderful Paul Elliott, and the Global Operations Director at Ubiquity. And my question to you, Paul, is why do you think the advertising industry needs to do this work? And what advice do you have for people who are at the beginning of their journey with service and advertiser missions?
I've probably split my answer into two parts then. I'll answer the first bit first. Why do you think the advertising industry needs to do this? I think we all know, right, that advertising is an enabler and an accelerator of growth and consumption. And we can't get away from the fact that growth and consumption are the major cause of the issues that we currently face in terms of carbon pollution as well as the other environmental impacts. So, whether we like it or not, every one of us who works in this industry is actually complicit in the problem. And that creates, obviously, a significant amount of cognitive dissonance for us all, right? Because I'm guessing everybody on this call is also dedicated to coming up with the solutions. So, for me, I think that I was faced with this kind of fight or flight choice. And I know that, I know many people have left the industry because they feel that they can't actually do anything about the way we operate. But for me, I choose to fight. I stand and fight. And I'm sure that, everybody on the call at the minute feels that they need to fight as well. I mean, and being experts within the industry, who's better placed to actually change the industry than those who work inside it? That's my view. So that's why it's important. In terms of the advice I would give, for me, patience and resilience has really been key. So just to give you a little bit of context, so my role is in global operations. I don't come from a sustainability background. I'm not an expert in that, and it's a bit of my side hustle for what I do at Ubiquity. But I've always had an interest in sustainability, and that was really kind of peaked when I did a couple of CISL courses back in 2024. There was the Sustainable Marketing, Media and Creative, and also Business Sustainability Management. And that really kind of pushed me to be really gung ho. I got really excited about, okay, so what can I take back to my organization and change? So I pulled together a program of change. I presented to the COO and CEO, and it was great. It was well received, but nothing happened because it wasn't their priority at the time. So what did I do next? Well, I then started working with Purpose Disruptors, and I completed the service to missions framework checklist. I created a client disclosure report, and I thought this is brilliant. We can start seeing what our actual impact is as a business. I shared that with the COO and the CEO, and as of yet, nothing has happened. So I'm learning to be patient and resilient. So I then volunteered to be part of the Purpose Disruptors Service to Missions Working Group, and that's been absolutely fantastic. As I say, it was a privilege to be able to contribute to the Beyond the Chaos report. Now, this is where the kind of patience and resilience starts to pay off. So our marketing team were very interested in that, and they started to amplify it in our socials, which is brilliant. And so it started to get a bit of traction internally. Also, currently, UK MD and our CEO are looking to work with ISBA to pull together a guide about responsible media. And they're starting to come to me now to, give them a bit of a debrief on what Purpose Disruptors have been doing, what is service to missions. And I've also been doing some other work with AdNet Zero on operational emissions. And it seems that interest is now there. So as I said, my advice is be patient, be resilient, and wait for people to actually get there on their own. Everyone's on their own journeys, on their own path. And, we've got to be cognizant of what we can control and what we need to just sit out and wait until people come to us in the same place that we're at. Interestingly enough, I I do recognise that there is opportunities to actually push a bit further as well. There was an opportunity for me to take responsibility for managing our enterprise risk, and I saw that as another great opportunity to start talking about sustainability at the higher levels of our business. Now, we're a publicly listed company, which has its own kind of complex hierarchical command and control lines. My boss is the CRO, his boss is the CEO, his bosses, as well as sitting on the board, his bosses are the board, and they're responsible to shareholders. So it's very hard to get that direct influence on the change that we want to see. However, managing the risk register enables me to put some sustainability risks on there. And I get the opportunity once every couple of months to talk to our audit and risk committee and go to the board meetings where we talk about risk. Again, though, it is about patience, because even though getting sustainability and environmental impacts onto the risk register is one thing, however, you've got to be aware of the fact that you're competing with a whole number of other risks, and a lot of those are more pressing. You know, they're more short term. So all I'd say is just stay with it. My second piece of advice, which kind of ties into that, is do the work, right? So doing the work might not guarantee success, but not doing it guarantees failure. Right. So you need to do the work. So put the yards in. You know, if you keep showing up, you keep not even pestering, but being an influence, having those conversations with people, there will come a time where it actually pays off. So as much as we want change now. We all need change now. We all know that. Sometimes you just got to wait. So do the work, be patient and resilient. Lastly, I think this is really important. It's recognizing that you're not alone. And, you know, that's crucial. As an individual, you can't do everything within your company, and it has to be a team effort. So I'd say make those connections at work. You know, those people who are interested in sustainability, reach out to them, speak to the people who manage the risk registers, start talking to them about the longer term risks. From my experience, as I say, risk registers tend to be very short term focused. It's all about the risk to revenue, the risk to the operations, tech risks, you know, cybersecurity risks. But if you start having those conversations about the longer term risks to the business, people will start to listen. So yes, to create that community within work, but then also recognize that there are things outside of your control. You know, the changes we're going to make are not going to come from a single individual or a single company. It's going to come from individuals. It's going to have to come from industry bodies. It's going to have to come from activist organizations such as Clean Creatives, or, you know, I don't know if you guys follow Ollie Frost, but I think he's absolutely brilliant. The work that Purpose Disruptors does. What you can do is you can sign up to the Purpose Disruptors working group for service to missions. That's a practical thing you can do tomorrow. You can follow and amplify what these activist organizations are posting on social media. You're starting to create that community. You could pressure your company to join AdNet Zero and other bodies that are working in this space. And you can support initiatives such as the one that Nadine mentioned about Oxford Net Zero and the work they were doing in trying to change the definitions on the Science-Based Target Initiative guidelines. And lastly, just sign industry petitions, write to your MP. There's plenty that we can all do, but you can't do it as an individual. So I know I'm probably running over time, but I'll say one last thing. So if you remember nothing else of what I've just said, please remember this one analogy. I think it's really important. It's a single wasp at the ad industry picnic is a minor nuisance and easily ignored. A swarm of wasps can't be ignored and demand attention. So all I'd say is be part of the swarm. That's how we're going to get the change.
Paul, that's absolutely fantastic. And thank you for your just total honesty. I think sometimes on masterclasses like this, I think people are kind of to giving a sort of a very polished version of the change that they've made. But I think your honesty about how messy it is and the need for patience, I think was absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much.
Jonathan, you're always very kind and say I'm authentic. Other people say I'm bloody mind, no social etiquette. So I'm happy with either.
Fantastic. So I'm sure that stimulated lots of thoughts for you, members of the audience. I'm now going to turn to Jenny Mossman, who is the head of impact and responsibility. And if Paul's kind of like playing at the beginning of his journey and understanding the connections and the relationships that he needs to build, then Jenny's been doing this for a while, and she has been featured strongly in the report, Beyond the Chaos report. So Jenny, a question for you is, how can sustainability teams, assess and communicate advertised emissions related risk when the data, as can be the case, is never perfect and the methods are still evolving? So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting listening to Paul, and obviously we've had lots of conversations, but every time I hear you talk, I always feel inspired by lots of the stuff you say. But I think that resilience piece is so key. Like, as you said, Jonathan, my role now is full-time sustainability, and I cover kind of our social and environmental sustainability at Amplify and some of our sibling agencies. But I used to work in production, so I very much was that annoying person knocking on people's doors, trying to kind of show the opportunity that I felt that there was, until I was eventually able to kind of make this role sort of full time. But I guess my background in production and delivery makes me, I think Nadine mentioned at the beginning, like, I like data and I like information and I like things to fit into neat boxes. And that's how I've always kind of delivered projects. And I think moving more into this space, I think sometimes that imperfect data is uncomfortable. And I mean, Nadine and I have had many conversations where we've gone around the houses somewhat with kind of trying to find information and data that is kind of as an acceptable level for us to sort of feel comfortable with. And I think, I don't know how many people on the call are involved in kind of wider carbon accounting, but I'm kind of always amazed that people maybe are questioning something like the advertised emissions calculation and framework, but we're so accepting of sort of general scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon accounting, which is, in my opinion, very much kind of finger in the air a lot of the time and just like hoping for the best, trying to find as accurate data as we can, particularly kind of on a spend-based model. So I think it's obviously a relatively sort of new space, and I think that kind of challenge with being okay with that imperfect data is definitely something I've felt. So yeah, feel you if you're kind of also going through that process. I think what has really helped us and sort of my mindset is actually it's setting that baseline, and in the same way that we are doing it with kind of operational emissions, being able to kind of gather as accurate data as possible, and then setting that as your kind of, okay, this is where we're at, and then actually being able to kind of scenario plan based on that, I think is where actually it's much more important than actually getting so bogged down in the numbers. And again, it's something I've really had to learn and continue to learn with it. But I think it's more around kind of identifying those hotspot areas. And I think for something like looking at our client base and looking at the kind of risk that's involved with a lot of those clients, I think actually being able to tap into those and really understand, okay, what are those kind of areas that actually maybe we want to consider reducing maybe some of our revenue, or actually what are some of those areas where we can really sort of start to grow our client base as well. And I think a lot of the report, which hopefully some of you have read, and if not, I'd really recommend having a read through, is obviously based on risk. Actually, equally as important is that kind of opportunity piece and being able to kind of maybe shift some of that revenue into other areas. And then I think some of the kind of, I guess, if we're talking more about that kind of data piece and trying to get that, our kind of heads around that, I think I'd obviously be happy to kind of talk through a bit more detail with anyone after this call, if anyone's interested, about how we kind of started to gather a lot of that. But I think actually the first time we did it, and kind of working with Nadine and Oman from Portsmouth University, felt quite daunting at first, and really being able to understand where we were going to get the data from and what to get those data points. I guess to say we did that last year, and I think we finalized our numbers maybe sort of November last year based on financial year 2024. It was very much more easily able to look at our financial year 2025 and be able to replicate that, because our client base is relatively similar, so we were able to kind of utilize some of those. We were able to know exactly where to look for some of that information, so looking at financial reports and being able to find those, looking at some of our big clients available kind of CDP reports and things like that, and actually finding those resources and tapping into those, I think is often the most difficult point. And actually, if we're all able as an industry to better share that, and to Paul's analogy, become part of that swarm to try and to share that, I think actually it is going to be a much easier process, hopefully, for other people to jump on board, and then actually being able to kind of share those learnings as well. If anyone is kind of wanting more detail on exactly where to look, or exactly that type of information, or advice on how sort of between Nadine, Oman and I started to do that, and how I kind of replicated that for financial year 2025. I'm more than happy to kind of do pointers in right directions and things like that.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. And yeah, just to the folks in the audience, I mean, if you are interested in exploring advertised emissions, whether you started or not, again, as you say, the people on the call here, particularly Jenny and Lucy, are basically the world experts in terms of using this in their organization. So this is like, the bleeding edge of change in that respect. So it's absolutely fantastic. And as Paul says, we're also looking for people to join the advertised emissions working group. So again, if that's something that is piquing your interest, please get in touch and we will be grateful to have a conversation with you. And so now I'm just going to move to Lucy, who is the head of sustainability at Oliver. So Lucy, we talked a little bit about kind of sort of transition risk. So the question, given you've been doing this for a while, is how do you think advertising emissions show up in the governance process, and how can you kind of avoid becoming unmanaged transition risk? I guess within that, it's like, how have you been using that as a way to speak to board members and other decision makers? And I also understand that you have a really exciting piece of news as well to share.
Absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, great question around, how do you kind of make this a managed transition risk, a kind of respected, credible topic amidst the many priorities that boards and leadership have. So it's kind of happened in stages for me at Oliver. And those stages have, to be honest, often been dictated by the quality of my relationship with the stakeholders and how far I felt I could push them. And sort of, when the business was performing well, it was actually easier to have these conversations. When the business is under enormous pressure, it's all about growth and bottom line, and it is much harder to get the airtime. So kind of timing is something. But yeah, first up, I head up sustainability. So I was able to, it was my job to shape what does the sort of global sustainability strategy look like. And when I put in kind of 4 key pillars, I made sure that one of them was around client portfolio and understanding who's in our client portfolio currently. And at the time, I think I said, 5 years from now, would this seem like a good idea? We want to potentially move away from or to grow, just kind of introduce the idea at a kind of low stakes way. But since then, because I considered that really early on, thanks to hearing about Purpose Disruptors work back in 2021, every time a slightly more mature opportunity came along to integrate it, I would put it forward. So when we set up our EMS, our environmental management system, and we had to name the risks, we included it as a risk. It wasn't one that we could quantify very well at the time, but then we made sure that we listed the fact that there are, industries and sectors within our client portfolio who will not survive the transition particularly well, and we should potentially be thinking about moving away from them. We then did calculate our advertised emissions for the first time. It was imperfect, which really bugged me because I really like getting things spot on. But with Nadine's brilliant coaching, we got to a really helpful headline of understanding that advertised emissions within Oliver's client portfolio, just for our top 20 clients, we have 200, was probably around 42 times bigger than our operational emissions. Now, that was a simple enough headline that I could take that up to leadership who didn't have time for the long story and just say, look, if you think the operational emission stuff is a bit of a pain, just imagine if we had to also manage our advertised emissions. This is a risk that you should be aware of. So just kind of starting to develop the story with the stakeholders that needed to hear it. And it was an ongoing conversation over years. And then most recently, we've actually been asked to, or we now have to as a business, contribute to TCFD style reporting. Brilliant. Advertised emissions is absolutely in there because it is definitely a transition risk, and it's one that we have good enough sort of sight and numbers around to be able to say this is where we're currently at. And, if the cost of carbon tax was this and we actually had to pay 42 times what our operational emissions are, woof, that's a pretty big risk to the business that I can put a vague number against, which is frankly is the best way to get it accepted as a credible, normalized risk, right? Everything needs to have a financial number against it. So it just makes it a topic that everybody can join in on. Because that's the thing I've found as well around leadership and senior stakeholders. They have to have their heads around every single topic. And at the end of the day, they just might not know much about this topic. I've gained, their trust over the years, and some of them have been great and really open and said, look, Lucy, I'm not saying I'm not into it, but I don't really understand what climate-related risk is. I need you to help break this down for me. So it's also helping meet them at their level so that they can understand how to place it in the matrix of priorities and risks that they're constantly juggling in their heads. And I didn't used to feel that way. I used to feel back in 21 that actually, I'm going to have to fight leadership, and it was always going to be a confrontation, and I'd have to sort of push my way through. over the years, I've developed a bit more empathy, to be honest, and compassion for them, and understanding that they are trapped in quite a tight system that has very strict expectations on them and significant consequences if they don't meet them. I've sort of changed my approach of, well, how can I support them, but also still push for what I know is best and right and would like to happen for the business. And then most recently, Oliver's had a no fossil fuel clients policy active for about 18 months, maybe 2 years now. We're really fortunate in that I'm not saying it was easy to get this through leadership, but we didn't actually have any revenue tied to fossil fuel clients. So it's a very different story. I know if you already have them in your portfolio, it's a more difficult conversation, but had many a conversation with leadership, many of whom either didn't get it or weren't supportive or a bit ambivalent, but I just kept going. And a lot of the examples and stats and facts that I picked up from Purpose Disruptors really supported the argument that I built. It really made me feel much more confident on this topic as well. And then, as happens, Oliver is now, part of a wider group, and we've been bought by a larger company. And suddenly I've got a whole new set of stakeholders, and I need to get them all on board with this no fossil fuel policies. Otherwise, it could change. They might say something different and it could wipe out years of work. So once again, building those relationships, it's now that I've done that first step, it's a little bit easier to position it to them as, well, we've got precedent. This is just how we do things here. We've eliminated risk by not accepting fossil fuel clients into our portfolio. We'd like to continue that way. Managed to get a good level of conversation with leadership in the group and developed a group-wide policy, which we'll have to consider the fact that some of our sibling companies do have fossil fuel revenue, so it's going to be a bigger challenge. But even just 10 minutes before this call, got an update from legal, usually our toughest challenger from the group, to say the policy looks good, only minor amends to make. So that's years and years in the making. Literally, I think I wrote the first no fossil fuel policy in early 22 for Oliver. But by starting back then, I've been able to scale the conversations, develop the understanding, push it up to a group level. And we're not done yet. We'll have to figure out how to communicate this in a way that everybody understands and gets on board with. There will be difficult conversations to come, but it's exciting and exhausting and satisfying to pick a few things to really go after and just be relentless with. And for me, this was one of them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. And folks, Lucy told us that news when we just before we joined the call. So I think Oliver may be the largest advertising company in the world that said no to fossil fuels if the policy gets validated by the board. So I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. So congratulations on that, Lucy. And as you say, kind of years of work and patience and perseverance. If you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to put them in the chat. So I'm going to pass you over to Nadine.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So our first question is from Aurelia, and she's asking, how can agencies change the narrative to increase visibility and awareness of service emissions when clients do not seem to pay much attention? I think, Jenny, this one might be for you.
Yeah. I guess, firstly, I think I'd say our kind of decision to kind of look at particularly our advertised emissions calculation and look at that kind of risk portfolio, I guess, hasn't really been led by our clients. I think it's more ensuring that we are sort of making sure that we're not kind of going down a rabbit hole and growing loads of revenue with lots of clients that actually aren't going to align with our values and are going to sort of increase risk in the future for us, whether that's fossil fuels or whether that's aviation or whatever sort of might be coming down the line. I think there's lots of really interesting examples. We work in France quite a lot, and they have introduced quite a lot of new legislation around fast fashion, for example, or advertising for sort of high carbon industries. So looking at aviation as well, and not just that sort of fossil fuel. So actually being able to kind of map our client portfolio and identifying those potential areas, I guess probably hasn't necessarily been directly client led. However, what we have found is being able to sort of be confident in saying that we have a no fossil fuel policy as well. We're obviously much, much smaller than Oliver. And so it was, again, an easier task for us to get that. We didn't have the revenue in the first place. So for us to kind of being able to sign up to that and confirm that was a much easier task than I think Lucy had on her hands, which was lucky for me. But I think actually being able to sort of stand confidently in saying that has allowed us to have interesting conversations with other clients. So there are definitely a lot of our clients that are really interested in that. And I think for them, if they're sort of really pushing in the kind of sustainability and responsibility space, for them to then be working with agencies or sort of wider service providers who don't show that same level of commitment, I think that's then a risk for them as well. And really being able to kind of make sure that ultimately we're aligning ourselves with brands and clients that kind of align with our values. I would absolutely love to say that we kind of look at those clients and go through our client screening tool and look at the kind of disclosure and say, actually, we'd never work with those clients who kind of come up badly. But again, to Lucy's point, I think we are still a commercial business and we still need to make money. So actually being able to use these tools, and whether that is the advertiser emissions calculation or whether that's some of the kind of wider client disclosure reporting and a lot of the stuff that comes up in that service emissions framework, it allows you to just have much more honest, transparent conversations. And yes, maybe the outcome isn't necessarily what you want sometimes, and it's not necessarily from my kind of full sustainability hat. Maybe I do get a bit frustrated sometimes, but actually really understanding that we are a business and we employ X number of people around the world, and actually being able to just have more informed conversations without it coming from a Guardian article that someone's sharing or someone's sort of really personal viewpoint on something. It's been super beneficial and kind of allows you to have those senior conversations a lot more transparently.
I'll just jump in there as well. I think with regard to science, it's really interesting. As Nadine said, we've been linking with Oxford Net Zero on the work on service emissions. They've now set up this thing called the Service Emissions Hub. And on Monday, so yesterday, I spent all morning in an investigatory kind of conversation with a global telco, a global FMCG company, and a global bank to talk about service emissions and whether or not it was appropriate for them to think about asking their agencies, their law firms they engage with, and the management consultants to engage in service emissions. So they were really fascinated by the idea, which they hadn't heard of before. So we've got an awareness problem. But I think that they thought that, they are an agent of change. And if they ask their service providers, agencies included, then that could be a really good way of them kind of leveraging their power and their money as a means to create change, kind of not in one category advertising, but in all. So I think watch the space on that, but it's a question of time before kind of clients start putting it in RFPs, which I think is going to be fascinating kind of point of leverage in the system. Next question is from Carmen. And the question, which I'll take first and then see if anybody else wants to say more. The question is, what does an effective industry-wide adoption pathway to service emissions look like? And what support structures need to be in place to ensure agencies of all sizes, including freelancers, can implement it consistently and confidently? Yeah, that's a very good question. Thanks, Carmen. So I think that what we see at the moment is that advertised emissions and the working group feel like we're kind of like the forward party, where the sort of the wasps who are seeking out where the sugar is, I suppose, or whatever metaphor Paul would say. So I think that we are kind of demonstrating proof of concept. We're demonstrating that there's desire, and we're demonstrating that it can be done, however imperfectly. I think that it will be the responsibility of, for example, the industry bodies such as ISBA, as Paul spoke about, the Advertising Association through AdNet Zero. I think that they have the opportunity to acknowledge the fuller impact of advertising in terms of climate change, i.e. through the consumption it helps contribute to. Leadership would be represented by them, for example, integrating it into AdNet Zero. I can't see that is something that they can avoid doing if they want to say that they're fully contributing to help address our climate emergency. And we're doing what we can to help make that happen. So, for example, we've got some from AdNet Zero sitting on our working group. I think also, from a client perspective, that would also be useful. I think it would be interesting, for example, you could create a pathway through the questions that clients would ask for on RFPs. So, for example, if P&G or Unilever were to say, as an agency, are you measuring and reducing your advertising emissions? That would kind of require a pathway to be created by all the agencies that work for those clients, for example. Similarly, if we could do something with tech platforms. So I think we can do as much as we can. And we're also seeking funding for the creation of something that's equivalent to PCAF to kind of create a global standard and the infrastructure to make that happen. But yeah, there's lots to be done. But I feel like we are doing what we can. It's also the responsibility of others with the foot in this game to also kind of come forward and take some responsibility as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything else to what I've just said.
I just had a small piece, I guess, which is a brilliant question. And I noticed, Tracy, that you also say, even right the way down to freelancers, like how can everybody use this framework? And I love and admire the kind of ambition to look at it holistically and imagine a really consistent, neat rollout. And I also say from a place of when theory meets practice, sometimes, every time, it's not consistent and neat in that way. So, partly to Jonathan's point, whoever could start, just start, because those people become the front runners and the pilot and the proof of concept and all of that. And so much is learned in that stage. And it also gives others confidence to get on and give it a go as well. But also, it's where can the most impact be made? Possibly, freelancers or individuals or very small companies might be able to take more effective action in other areas, whereas serviced emissions really, I think, is something that makes the most sense for holding to account larger businesses. And so that's where I would kind of focus the efforts in that way. So it's a bit of a kind of don't eat the elephant all at once type story, which someone once said to me, and it really stuck because I was trying to eat the elephant all at once and I was not able to keep up.
Thanks, everyone. We have a question from Tracy. It's made up of 2 parts, so please feel free to answer one or both. Are any of the agencies seeing sustainability policy appearing in statements of work or RFIs, RFPs to allow you to showcase the fantastic work you're doing? Part 2, are any of you client-facing, actively working with clients to collaborate on any of this?
Yeah, I have a few short examples for part 1. Love that. Microsoft is one of our big clients, and they every year ask for our sustainability performance, right the way down to scopes 1, 2, 3. But actually, they were the first client ever, and possibly still the only client who wanted it down to what they call a serviced emissions level, actually, which is how much of our emissions is relevant to the work that we do for them. So they don't want our overall company stats. They want to know how much of it is relevant to them based on the goods and services that we provide to them as a client. So I think they asked that for the first time maybe 2 years ago. And every time they ask for a disclosure from us, they also say, prepare yourselves, next year we'll be asking for more. So they've got like a really good kind of ratcheting up model of their suppliers that is then great for me to learn from. I go, that's lovely wording. I'm going to take that and pop that in our own sustainable procurement policy. We also had one of our law firm clients, global law firm clients, added in something from the Chancery Lane project, which if you haven't heard of is a brilliant resource to look up. Pre-written clauses, very loyally written by lawyers, for how to integrate expectations around sustainability performance from the suppliers into contracts. And they imposed that upon us. We agreed upon it. And that says that we actually have to reduce our carbon footprint by 7% every year, or have a good chat with them about why not, which is great to see and really supports then my arguments up to leadership of this isn't just my opinion or a good idea or far of regulation. This is current client interests. Who'd like part 2?
Thanks, Lucy. Jenny, you're client-facing on some projects. Would you like
I can jump in on that part 2 bit. So yeah, I do work quite a lot with quite a number of our clients, and I think similarly to Lucy, some clients are much more interested in this than others, and I think sometimes we get, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of our RFPs or RFIs are asking for some form of sustainability policy now. How much that then actually translates when we actually win the work or start working directly with clients really depends on the individual and depends on that direct client contact. And I think it's really interesting to see the difference. And actually, I've sort of worked in this role for nearly 3 years now, and it seems to be more and more. And I think actually our direct client, day-to-day clients are probably getting it directly into their goals and objectives and things that they're setting. Whereas maybe 2-3 years ago, it was a policy up here that no one really thought about. No one really thought about how they're going to hit their 2040 or 2050 targets. Whereas now I think companies are having the realization that it is the people on the ground that are really going to have to look at that. I think our main business is made up of kind of brand experience and events, which obviously has a huge carbon footprint attached to it. So actually being able to have those conversations with clients who understand it and really get it, I think is really important. And so I am quite active in some of those, I guess, those bigger clients and those clients who are really interested in it. We do a lot of stuff out in Cannes, for example, Cannes Lion, which over the past 4 or 5 years that we've worked there has seen some wildly differing weathers and lots of things that have ultimately brought a lot of risk for our clients and us having to bring that in. So being able to kind of confidently have those conversations with clients of actually, this is why this is important, and you have seen a direct correlation of why that is, I think is something that has hopefully really supported the teams here to have that, and having the resources from people like Purpose Disruptors and Clean Creatives and all of that back up that information and data has been, super beneficial, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without them.
Thanks, Jenny. So just one final question. Paul, this one's probably for you before we wrap up. If you could influence how future creatives and strategists are trained, where and how should service dimensions enter the learning process and have real impact?
Right at the very beginning. I don't want to sound glib, but I think at this stage it is down to the younger generation. And it seems to me everything I've seen in terms of the research out there, I mean, the IPA did a really good study, I think beginning of last year, that surveyed everybody in the industry and looked at how anxious they were and then whether they felt empowered enough to actually raise their concerns about sustainability issues within the agency and the climate impact that their work was having. And that was more pronounced with the younger generation within agencies. And I think from my experience and what I see, it's more of a focus, it's more of a priority for those people a lot younger than me. Unfortunately, I grew up in an industry that had other priorities, but I think that sustainability and the environmental impact is becoming more and more of a focus. So I think that we're going to see a demand for that level of training when people join the industry. They want to know the impacts, both positive and negative, of what they're being asked to do in their new careers. So I think it starts there. And there are some great initiatives. I mean, Change the Brief that you guys are involved in were absolutely fantastic. I know the IPA have done some work, Agents of Change. I think I'd also put this back on individuals within the industry as well. It's like, what can you do as an older statesperson in the industry to help mentor people who are coming in? If you've got this passion about sustainability, what can you do to actually help the younger generation on their way, on their path? Because another great bit of research was, I don't know if you guys recalled the cast and briefing research when they looked at senior professionals within the business who are demanding change. They want policy change, they want regulation change, but they feel that they haven't got the power to influence those kind of corporate strategic decisions. Well, they are one day. The younger generation are going to have that power one day. So let's equip them from the very start.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for all your questions. Unfortunately, we're at time, but I'm going to hand over to Jonathan for some final words.
Thanks, Nadine. Thanks, everybody. Oh, well, that's a really rich hour. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you so much also for the panel, for being with us. And yeah, just some closing thoughts, I think. I think we're going to go, it's going to be a turbulent year, and there are many other priorities that exist. As well as climate. So I guess the question will be, as we say here, can we influence upwards? We are like, if you get in touch, if you want to present upwards in terms of talking about climate risks and how this is a really important thing for you to consider. So we are open to that. We would really welcome being able to support anybody speaking to their senior management teams or taking out of sustainability up towards the board. Move together. Please feel free to apply to join an advertised emissions working group. As you can hear, as it's going to be a bumpy year, kind of being together, being wasps together in the swarm, may well be one that can save us and our mental health. So we would welcome people joining us that. And as of course, just start. So just complete the service emissions framework. That's something that many of the working group did. And just to be able to see that we're already taking action is the starting point. And then the more advanced conversations that we've heard today can be what happens next. But really grateful that everybody's joined us. A really great start to 2026. And congratulations again to Lucy for her world-leading action, and Paul and Jenny for being so honest about and so sharing about what you've been up to in this area. So thanks, everybody. And we hope to see you all again soon. Take care.
We want to help you answer the question, what is the first step I can take tomorrow from where I stand? There are 3 key actions: influence upwards, move together, and just start. Contact us to present to your executive team or to join the advertised emissions working group. You can also complete the Serviced Emissions Framework checklist and find more resources online. Thank you for watching this masterclass. You can get in touch via email, Instagram, or LinkedIn for further information.